Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His mercy endures forever. Welcome to Faith Matters with Phillip Campbell, a Catholic variety program broadcasting on Good Shepherd Catholic Radio out here in lovely Jackson, Michigan. I am the aforementioned Phillip Campbell, your host and traveling companion for the next half hour. And as always, I'm so pleased that you are tuning in to be with us again for another episode of Faith Matters. One of the most well-known precepts of Christianity is the obligation we have to forgive those who have wronged us. And this is so central, so essential to the Christian faith that even people that know nothing else about Christianity whatsoever, even people who are totally ignorant of the Christian faith, they still know that forgiveness is at the center of our religion. Not only the forgiveness that we are bound to offer those who injure us, but the forgiveness that God himself extends to us through Jesus Christ, that God makes available to us through the atoning death of Jesus. Forgiveness, reconciliation, is really the cornerstone of our religion. Not only is this taught by Christ in multiple places, we'll talk about the parable of the unforgiving servant, of course, the Lord's Prayer, right? Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. But it's also taught very profoundly by example by Christ when he extends forgiveness to his enemies who are crucifying them. Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do, right? This forgiveness is imitated by the saints. For example, St. Stephen in the book of Acts, when he's being stoned to death, he says, Lord, do not lay this sin against them. He's imitating the example of Christ and forgiving his enemies. And of course, if we were to look through the history of the church, we would find many inspiring and stunning examples of forgiveness. Perhaps in modern times, the most renowned example of heroic forgiveness is that of Saint Maria Goretti, who was assaulted and stabbed to death, and appeared shortly after death in a vision to her killer, and said that she forgave him. So forgiveness is very central to Christianity. Today we're going to discuss forgiveness, what it is, and why we must extend forgiveness to those who harm us. Sometimes that's tough, right? Sometimes we don't want to forgive. Sometimes ourselves is the one we can't forgive. We do something stupid. We do something we do something bad, and we have a hard time forgiving ourselves. One time when I was 16. My my band played in a talent show in front of the whole high school, and we were playing a song, and we were about to end the song, and all I had to do was strike one specific note to end the song, and I struck the wrong note. It was so obvious. I still cringe when I think about it. I have a hard time forgiving myself for hitting the wrong note and embarrassing my whole band in front of the school. Well, that's a pretty trite example, but you know what I mean. We all do things where we're like, oh gosh, how can I ever forgive myself? The etymology of the English word for forgiveness is very interesting. It comes from two Old English words, for and gefen, forgefen. For, in this context, means completely, wholly, or totally, and gefan means to give or receive. So the word forgefan in English means, or its etymological root means to receive or give completely or totally. That is to extend the hand completely, to rebuild a relationship by giving completely, giving pardon completely. And then there's various words in Hebrew and Greek that help form the Christian notion of forgiveness, and there's too many in the Bible for us to explore all of them. I mean, I think there's two words for forgiveness in Hebrew, I think, and then in Greek there's something like 5 or maybe more, but two words caught my attention in the Hebrew, two different terms, nasa and salah. Nasa and salah. Nasa refers to people extending pardon to each other. That is the act of forgiving or reconciling with one's enemy, forgiving a debt, for example. That is nasa in Hebrew. But then you have salah, which refers exclusively to God's forgiveness extended to the sinner. And you'll often see this in Hebrew where an act that God does has its own specific verb unique to itself. And that's the case here with salah. It refers exclusively to God's forgiveness extending to the sinner. And it shows us that while what we do when we forgive and what God does when he forgives are similar, they're also very different. God's forgiveness comes from a different sort of place than our forgiveness does. I mean, they're similar, but God's is on a very different level. Now, the general idea of forgiveness in any language is that of pardon. Pardon meaning the cancellation of a debt or obligation, or maybe the remission of punishment, an agreement, so to speak, to let bygones be bygones. That is, we're not going to consider an offense anymore. Something happened, something bad happened, and we agree to not to not punish, to not collect on it, to not make a big deal about it, whatever you want to say. We basically let it go. And maybe sometimes this is a situation where we have a right, if we wanted to exercise a right in strict justice, that we could collect, right? We could say, hey, you owe me that money. I insist that you pay. Or you deserve that punishment, and I'm going to see that you get it, right? So sometimes forgiveness is the cancellation of a punishment or a debt that is legitimately owed and could be collected on. And forgiveness then becomes a higher way, a way of exercising charity and mercy. I'm thinking of situations in history where there might be a criminal who was condemned to death, and a certain saint might come and plead with the king to not execute the death sentence, and then if the saint was successful, the king would forgive the criminal and spare their life. So whether we consider forgiveness as something that goes on between people, or between God and the sinner, or between different entities like nations choosing to forgive one another for past aggression or things like that, no matter what we're considering, the concept of forgiveness is at the heart of any attempt to restore a broken relationship. It's like a first step. It's like a foundation. Let's say something happens. Let's say a relationship gets broken or strained. Let's say within the family, for example, someone in your family does something and it really grates on you. It breaks the relationship down. If that is to be restored, the concept of forgiveness has to be at the heart. It's the foundation stone. If someone doesn't agree to let bygones be bygones and overlook the offense, then that offense continues to poison things going forward. And it makes the relationship impossible to restore, at least impossible to restore to the way it was before the offense. You've probably all had situations where you get into a fight with somebody, or somebody does something bad to you, and time goes by and things go back to normal, but then if there's another altercation, people drag up that old stuff, right? They drag it up and throw it in your face, or you drag it up and throw it in their face, and then everybody gets mad. Why are you bringing up the past? That's what happens if we can't truly forgive. These things from the past keep coming back. They keep troubling us. They keep poisoning relationships going forward, and it makes the relationship impossible to restore, and sometimes impossible even to maintain. Now, this next point might be self-evident, but I think we must emphasize forgiveness implies an admission of wrongdoing. Let me say this again. Forgiveness implies an admission of wrongdoing. Now, not necessarily from the person doing it, right? Jesus' executioners did not admit they were doing anything wrong, right? But he still forgave them. So I'm not saying that the person who wronged you has to understand or admit that they wronged you for you to forgive them. What I mean is that there has to be some some actual wrong committed that is acknowledged, that in strict justice deserves some kind of penalty. You often see these situations in a family, for example, where somebody wrongs somebody else or something bad happens, and the wrong is not acknowledged. Nobody confronts it. It's just simply not discussed. It becomes that thing that we don't talk about. Have you ever had this situation? It's just something that isn't confronted, isn't discussed, and people eventually, they just move on, and they go back to the way things were. Now that might restore some normalcy, but that's not forgiveness when you just kind of bury it. Hush, hush, don't talk about it. Forgiveness requires the wrong to be brought out into the light, to be confronted, at least by the party doing the forgiving. Your mom or your sister who said the mean thing to you at the holiday dinner last year, they might never apologize. They might never acknowledge that what they said was hurtful or wrong. But you at least need to acknowledge it. You at least need to bring it into the light, bring it to God, and make an effort to forgive that person, whether or not they ever know they did something wrong. It's about you understanding that you need to offer forgiveness. Now, that brings up a question. Isn't the person supposed to be sorry first? Like, sometimes you might want to think, well, I'll forgive so-and-so if they were really sorry. If they made an attempt to apologize, I'd forgive them. Well, actually, while that would make forgiveness easier, the answer is no. That's not required. Forgiveness, Christian forgiveness at least, is not about them. It's not about them. It's about you. It's all about you. If you read Jesus' preaching on the subject, his preaching on forgiveness puts the onus on the one doing the forgiving. It puts the burden on us to forgive. He doesn't say forgive once they sufficiently convince you of their contrition. He just says forgive. It's about us imaging God. It's about us reflecting the forgiveness of God in how we interact with our fellow man. It's not about us sitting as judge to try to make sure the other person is sufficiently sorry before we agree to extend forgiveness. So forgiveness is ultimately about you. It's ultimately about, will you hold on to resentment? Will you hold on to wrongs? Or will you agree to let them go and let God heal your heart? Again, that other person might never apologize. They might never believe that they were in the wrong. They might be obstinate till the day they die, but that does not change the need for you to forgive. It does not change the value of your forgiveness or the obligation to forgive. So forgiveness is about our heart, and it's always related to God's own forgiveness. Our forgiveness is always tied to God's forgiveness. Think about this. The Our Father that we pray regularly, it says, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. God makes it related. He makes it conditional. The degree to which we are forgiven is related to the degree that we forgive. Now, why is that? It's because we know that, strictly speaking, we don't merit forgiveness. We didn't deserve or earn the death of Christ on the cross that reconciles us with God. God extends it to us even though the human race was unworthy of that salvation. He forgives us out of the great abundance of his mercy, even though it was unmerited by us. And similarly, because of that, in recognition of that, in honor of that, in imitation of that, we are called to extend forgiveness even to those who don't deserve it. Now, there's also the parable in Matthew 18 of the unforgiving servant. It says, Peter came up to Jesus and said to him, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? See, Peter thinks he's being very magnanimous by saying 7 times. Jesus says, I do not say to you 7 times, but 70 times 7. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his servants. When he began the reckoning, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. This is a very large amount. And as he could not repay, his lord ordered him to be sold with his wife and children and all that he had, and payment to be made. So the servant fell on his knees, imploring him, and said, Lord, have patience with me, I will pay you everything. And out of pity for him, the lord of that servant released him and forgave him the debt. Now notice, he didn't just say, I'll give you more time to pay the debt back. He said, you are forgiven of the debt. But that same servant, as he went out, he came upon one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. Now that's a very small amount of money. And seizing him by the throat, he said, pay back what you owe. So his fellow servant fell down and besought him, have patience with me and I will pay you. But he refused and went and put him in prison till he should pay the debt. When his fellow servants saw what had taken place, they were greatly distressed. They went and reported to their lord all that had taken place. His lord summoned him and said to him, you wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you sought me. Should you not have had mercy on your fellow servants as I had mercy on you? And in anger his lord delivered him to the jailers till he should pay back all his debt. So also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart. So the servant is like us. We are forgiven a large debt by the Lord. But then we can be so petty, failing to forgive even small offenses. Oh, my cousin said this mean thing to me at Thanksgiving dinner, and now I'm not going to talk to her, right? So petty compared to what the Lord did for us. But also another thing that comes out of this parable is it seems the servant didn't trust that he was forgiven. It says the Lord forgave him his entire debt, but the first thing he does, he goes out and he tries to collect from other servants. Why was he so desperate to get that money back? He'd been forgiven, but it seems as if he didn't have confidence. He didn't have trust in his Lord that he had been forgiven. And so he goes out and he starts choking his fellow servant, saying, pay back what you owe, and throws him in prison till he should pay the debt. So he had no confidence in his Lord's forgiveness. I guess perhaps it takes a forgiving person to truly recognize and appreciate an act of forgiveness. The Lord also says, my heavenly Father will do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart. So again, forgiveness is an act of the heart. It's an internal act. And this helps make sense of a question people often bring up when we talk about forgiveness, which is that, well, you know, sometimes you deal with a toxic person, like a real abusive person. I don't want to restore a relationship with that person. Why would I want to restore a relationship with a person who's just hurting me and abusing me? I mean, I shouldn't have an obligation to restore a relationship with that person. Well, remember, forgiveness is an act of the heart. Even though forgiveness is a precondition for restoring a relationship, not all forgiveness necessitates restoring a relationship. God doesn't want you to subject yourself to harmful abuse. Forgiveness is an act of the heart. We can forgive someone, but not like them. Let me say that again. It's possible to forgive somebody while not liking them. We can forgive someone, but recognize that it's not wholesome to be in their company. We can truly forgive someone from our heart and understand that it's not good to be around them. Because if they're too aggressive or violent or belligerent or whatever, or scandalous, it's obvious it's not good to be around them. But that doesn't mean that we need to hold grudges, that we need to be petty, that we need to seek vengeance. You can forgive because forgiveness comes from your heart, as the parable said. It's an internal act. It's about a disposition of the heart, about bearing no grudge, wishing them the best, being able to pray for them. That is why we are told to pray even for our persecutors. And this is why it's possible to forgive even people who are dead. Have you ever had a person in your life that you had a falling out with? Maybe they did something really bad to you, and then, you went away and you stewed on it for several years and you're still angry with that person, and then later you hear that person's dead. That's happened to me, to be honest. Happened to me just last year, as a matter of fact. Well, we can still forgive that person even though they're dead, because forgiveness doesn't require anything from us other than a movement of the heart to give it up to God, to let go, to say, I'm going to bear no grudge. I forgive you. I'll pray for you. I'll pray for your soul. I choose to let this go and to not dwell on it anymore, to no longer live in anger. You can do that even if the person is dead. You can pray for them. Just like we should pray for our persecutors whenever someone does something to you, unpleasant or evil or jerkish. The Christian thing to do is to pray for them. Now, why? Why do we need to do this? Why is this such an obligation? Why does God require this of us? What benefit does it have? Why do I need to forgive the guy who did something horrible to me? How does that help me? Well, let's think this out a bit. To be alive, to be in the world, to be among men, you're obviously going to get hurt and injured by people, right? Because the world is a cold, hard place. People can be rude, and you're simply going to get hurt. That's just the way of life. Now, if we were to respond with coldness to every injury, if every time we got injured, if every time somebody hurt us, we were to hold a grudge and respond with coldness, what kind of people would we be after a while? Well, I can tell you we wouldn't be very pleasant people to be around. Would love even be possible? Would it be possible to love if we never forgave? If we just got into the habit of retaining every injury? It'd be kind of like having a, you know how everybody has that dish towel in their kitchen that you use for like a week until it just starts to smell, right? It's all sour, it's stained. Imagine never changing out that dish towel. Imagine the dish towel you got the day you moved in the house is going to be the only dish towel till the day you die, and you can never wash it. I mean, imagine how foul that would smell, how bad it would look, right? That's going to be your soul. That's going to be your soul if you never forgive. If you retain all that injury, all that, you'd be so cold. And then even if you wanted to love, even if you wanted to be magnanimous, you just simply wouldn't be able to because you'd be such a cold, skeptical, cynical, rough around the edges, just icicle person. And God does not want us to be icicle people, I don't believe. He wants us to cultivate magnanimity, the virtue of magnanimity, which is the virtue of being of great mind and great heart, characterized by a refusal to be petty and to delight in acts of benevolence, If we think about it from the point of view of magnanimity, being wronged, being sinned against, actually affords us the opportunity to become better. And this isn't necessarily a uniquely Christian idea. I mean, you can find this in, if you go back and read Plato's Republic, it goes back to the idea that people may do evil to you, but they cannot make you be evil. That is, to commit evil is worse than to be a victim of evil, because he who commits evil actually becomes evil, whereas no matter how much evil you do to me, I can take that and turn it around and turn it into virtue. If somebody sins against me, I can choose to exercise benevolence, to exercise magnanimity, to be of great soul, great heart, to be of nobility. And in that sense, being wronged actually affords me an opportunity to become better. And even more so to the degree that we forgive a greater wrong. If we can forgive even greater wrongs, we become even more magnanimous, even more virtuous, and more saintly. This is why, if you're brave enough, many of the saints have even prayed for God to give them suffering, for God to give them trials, because they understand that by taking a trial and bearing it with magnanimity, that they actually grow in that virtue. They become giving, more generous, more saintly. So again, being wronged can afford us the opportunity to become better people, more so to the degree that we are forgiving even greater wrongs. This is why God prescribes this for us. It's a means of growth. It is a means of growth. And if we can't forgive, then every awful thing that is thrown at us is just going to stick to us for our whole life. And that's a really terrifying prospect. And that's when God says that he's going to cast us out. If we've never forgiven, if we've retained all that evil, we ourselves, in the end, make ourselves evil by our inability to forgive. And then we are the antithesis of imaging Christ. We are something totally different that we don't want to be. So, when we are wronged, it's best to forgive quickly, to not stew on it, to not let it bubble over into resentment, whether that's in our marriage, in our family life, at work, or in the public sphere, in politics, right? These days we need more of that. We need more forgiveness to restore relationships, or just to move on in peace, and that's all anybody really wants, right? All right, well, it's something to consider. Is there anyone in your life you need to extend forgiveness to? You probably should. You never know. You never know when you're going to run out of time. You never know when they're going to be gone. If we can forgive today, let's forgive while we still have the opportunity. So until next time, my friends, this has been Faith Matters with Phillip Campbell. May the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. God bless.